Captain, I'm very sorry, sir. So I would like to start by asking, obviously these days, the zombie movement is so ingrained in pop culture, you can't go anywhere without seeing zombie everything. And you guys were kind of, if not pioneers, you were definitely on the ground level. It was so early in that. And I'm just wondering, 30 years later, looking back and seeing what a big impact this movie's had on pop culture, how do you guys feel knowing that you were a part of it from kind of the beginning?
We'll go down the line, right?
Yeah, well, I feel like I'm standing on the dock looking at the ship sailing out.
And your pocketbook too.
We had no sense. I had no sense of being part of, establishing a cult movement or being part of something that would build in such a way. But it's fascinating to see how it has, and I'm just trying to work out how to get into it.
Yeah. Well, it's about the TV. It's about television, and television is built to sell for product and explore character larger than you could in Day of the Dead. We are about the plot and where we are at that point in time. I just think what we did back then was special in its own way. Right now that TV has you all hooked into them, everybody can look back and get retrospect on what we did back then, and it stands the test of time. That's all I can say about Day of the Dead.
Okay. If I need a mic, let me know. Anybody that's thwarting, we've switched to Day of the Dead. Hashtag our telephone is an asshole. Shakespeare said that we are such stuff as dreams are made of. And in 1984, Terry Jarlith, unfortunately, Lori's not available, Gary's unavailable, but we did celebrate the 30th anniversary in Cleveland. You could look it up on YouTube. Just go 30th anniversary panel Cleveland, blah, 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 blah. Shakespeare said in such stuff, we are such stuff as dreams are made of. So in 1984, we were part of George's dream. The only audience we had was the crew. They were a captive audience. Then the picture was released, and then a bond came. It's not just us, as we are such stuff that dreams are made of. It's now you and us are such stuff as dreams are made of. None of us could have conceived that we would have the pleasure and the warmth and the love of thousands of people. You, without you, we're a piece of celluloid, two-dimensional. With you, we are a rich family.
Well, and I think what you were saying, Terry, about how the TV right now can really get more into character development than you guys did. I don't know, I think out of all of the original Romero trilogy, I do think that Day had more character development and more person, like you could really relate to everyone that was down in that bunker. And I think that you guys focus so much on character, but that's why the characters have such longevity and the fans are so connected to them and have that bond. I don't think you got that in the others because they maybe were more action driven. And I was wondering, when you guys got the script, what helped you shape that character? What was kind of defining things in the script maybe that you used to shape how you were going to portray those characters in the film?
I thought George's writing was very specific. I thought his characters were well defined, and that's what we look for as actors when we read anything at all. For me, George was looking for a specific character from a Caribbean style of accent. And that for me is a symbol of us living underground, and it lends a certain kind of intensity for craving for the sun. That's why I thought he put it in there, but that's what he wanted specifically. And I said to myself, yes, this is a great role, and I know I can pull it off. I hope I can pull it off. And George is a wonderful director who works with actors inside out and pulled out stuff that everybody was grateful for. Absolutely.
Yeah, well, McDermott was Irish, so that defined him to some extent. And so his phrasing and some of that, as Terry said, his language defined who he was, and it was an exploration for me in a way. And George, a lot of the time, he never gave much direction. I don't remember having a great conversation with him about the character. He just kind of let it be. If he wanted something more, he asked for it. But he was a very, very sensitive director. He was very aware of his actors and where they were coming from.
What was the thing you said about the sun? Craving for the sun.
Craving for the sun.
Terry's got to deal with Coppertone. So I just want to.
I got stuck.
Yeah.
I got stuck.
No, the thing is, fortunately or unfortunately, the big budget movie did not get made because George could not provide an R rating. Because George is always his own man. So what he had to do was to take, Captain Rhodes was not a captain, Captain Rhodes was a Dr. No figure. And I didn't read the original script prior to reading the new script, and I don't know if any of my colleagues had. But you can read the original script, and you can read, of course, the script we shot. So what George had to do was to pull back on the budget, put everything underground, and compress. So you have the military point of view in collision with the scientific point of view, in collision with the kind of Jamaican aspect, voodoo.
Spiritual.
And then Antoine with the Hispanic point of view. Spirit, whatever.
Yeah.
But in other words, it was like conflict, it was like a four-fisted fight.
Yes.
And that's the compression that got created. We got killed by the critics when it was released. Everybody wanted the next shopping mall.
Yeah.
Don't give us a fucking mind. What are you doing? We want an Empire State Building. Siskel and Ebert took 20 years to turn around. Gave it a thumbs down. I cried watching that show, and 20 years later they gave it a thumb up. It was the compression that created the vitality and the intellectual genius, political, of George's script.
And the sexual tension.
Yeah,
with
everything.
one woman and all
Everything.
this particular raunchy men running around.
And he was fooling around with the zombies anyway, so.
Yeah, the zombie girlfriend out there. No, but television back in the day when we made this movie only had 4 channels. Now they have hundreds of channels and they're not regulated. So now you can get all kinds of special effects, which we couldn't do back then on TV, so that attracts people. But now they can develop their characters lengthwise for years instead of 90 minutes, so they have an advantage over us in a sense, except for commercial.
And over the years, I know you guys have done, several conventions and fan meetups, and now with it being the 30-year reunion, you guys are kind of on a press tour for that.
Oy vey.
And I was just curious if you had anything that kind of stood out in your mind over the years of meeting any certain fans or anybody that really has been impacted by this, or just hearing people's cultural, like how they grew up with the film. How has that affected you guys as actors and in your work since?
Wow. I was always surprised back then when somebody would recognize me from the movie, because I went back into TV and did soap operas for years and years and years, and that's another kind of audience. So it was always joyful for me for someone to say, "Hey man, I saw you in the Dead Mind, and the character was so good," and all of that. And I said, "Oh, thank you," because TV takes over. Really.
How you doing, baby? That's the beauty. That's the impact. I see people, they come with a 6 or 7 or 8-year-old kid, and they show me a picture of me holding the kid 6, 7 years ago in my arms. So I could spend hours on that. My fundamental question is, when is the last time you were truly scared by either reading something or seeing something? When is the last time you were frightened by either seeing something or reading something? And do we have the possibility in this present time to experience fright and terror? Or are we just looking at how the fright and terror is executed? No pun intended, because you can watch an ISIS beheading, or you can watch Saw 17. I don't know what the difference is. That's something you want to comment on or ask questions about. I think it's a relevant point for the genre.
Yeah, I've always been impressed by the fans. I haven't done a lot of these. I've done 4 or 5. And it was a bit of a discovery to realize there were so many fans, but I didn't spend a lot of time working TV or movies. I did a lot of theater work. But I've also been very impressed by the number of people who came up and said they saw this picture when I was 6 or 8 or 12, and it really affected my life. And I was really impressed by that.
Pretty intense for a 6-year-old. Do we have any questions from the audience? We'll take a, yeah, all right, right here.
This is for you, Joe. It looked me had a lot of fun playing Captain Rhodes, but what was the thing you thought was the meanest thing you had to say as Rhodes?
Just repeat the last part of it.
The meanest thing you had to say as Rhodes.
It wasn't the meanest thing I had to say. You would think that getting pulled apart would be the most horrible experience, and it was pretty horrible because of the guts going rancid. Everybody knows the story. But putting a 35 Magnum to the temple of my good friend John Amplis, whose performances in Martin is astounding. I don't know if you're in that loop. And pulling the trigger to know that he had a squib in his temple that would explode with blood. That was the worst moment for me. And I'm not even sure if whether I knew John or not, which I did, or if it was just an actor I had never met. Putting the point of a gun to somebody's temple and pulling the trigger is just a very mean. And the other stuff, you know, sit down woman or I'll have you shot, you want me to salute those walking piles of pus. That shit, really, I hate the scenery. Let's not argue. I hate the fucking scenery. But that was the most difficult moment and memory.
Next question? Yeah.
You guys, not the one that played Rhodes, but you other two, when I go back and look at this movie, one of the most terrifying scenes from that movie is towards the end where you guys are having to go through those caverns to get toward your freedom. What was that like filming that?
All that stuff in the caverns was very difficult because we weren't down in a cave. We were inside the base of a mountain, and there was limestone dust in the air all the time. Everybody got sick, more than once. You had to be a real trooper to get through all that stuff. And when Jarlath was running through the cave and I was running through the caves, it was like, hurry up and let's run through the caves because this is killer, man. This stuff is killing us. So yeah, all that stuff was very difficult to do, all of it.
I remember once, you remember the chap that was in the kimono, the Asian guy, and he was a black belt in karate for real, or in some form of martial arts. And I used to sit around with him in the hotel at the bar, and anytime I moved, his body would immediately change in relation to my movement. And I noticed that, so when it came time to hit him in the head with a rubber shovel, I went over to him and I said, I forget his name, but I want you to see, this is a rubber shovel. So, give me a break. Other than that, we just got through it.
Yeah.
Never heard that story. Ma'am, I'm sorry. You said that it terrifies you, or does it still terrify
It
you?
still terrifies me.
That's good.
Yeah.
Getting back to the limestone, we come out 16 hours, you blow your nose, and every LSD color in the world would come out of your nose. But okay.
Yeah, if any of you don't know, that actually was filmed in a working limestone mine that was still active. Now it's an underground storage facility, and it's over 1 million square feet. So it was about the size of this convention center, but it is actually like underground and huge and full of toxic stuff. So
Yeah,
that adds to the claustrophobia.
we're all dying.
Yes, and also back in the day, the special effects were a little slower than they are now. It took a lot of time to do the blood squibs and the gunshots and way over there, and they had to wire us up and put stuff down under our costumes and wire it all the way where you are. And that took a lot of standstill time, and that's why people got sick. So it was
But-
tough.
Fortunately, Terry brings out a very good point. The special, I did a CG movie about 3 years ago, and I still vomit every day thinking about being on a green screen and talking with a helmet on my head into a person that I never met. This was very artisan. This was hands-on. Savini, Nicotera, there was that would go on the green screen, you do bop, 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 bop. No, this was sculpting, this was molding, this was artistry. Maybe I'm a fogey, I don't know. I have a lot of problems with CG, and I have a lot of admiration for people that put their hands on the product.
Another question from Ash.
This one is for Joe. When it comes to playing a villain, was there a dark place for you that you had to draw from in order to get that kind of performance out of you? Or was it very natural for you?
Well, don't forget, this was shot in '84. I had been beaten, gassed, and chased, and maced during the anti-war protests. So I had a ton of bile built up in my system against the military, which I still carry today. If I offend anybody, you can come to my table and we'll talk about it. So it was very easy. And aside from the politics, villains are always, and actors love to play villains because you can eat the scenery. Imagine playing Hitler. You could go, Deutschland, motherfucker, get me ham and eggs. You can get away with playing more subtle roles as my compatriots. You know, I got to be on the extreme. So the darkest place that I did come from, and the brightest place I came from, was the George's writing, my affinity with my colleagues. The darkest place I came from was the hatred for the war in Vietnam and what I had experienced from exercising my First Amendment rights.
And I think that's part of why, even though Rhodes obviously is such a clear-cut villain, there are still people who watch it that can sympathize with some of his points, or who still are like, okay, I get it, but oh, it is so satisfying, I'm sorry. Like, when he gets it, that's one of the best moments. Like, and I think there's probably nobody in this room that didn't inside, yes, just a little.
Except the National Organization of Women, because I speak 3-4 times a year to them. No.
Rhodes was such a feminist and so pro-women,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, I know.
I had somebody in the back a second ago, I thought. Yes, lady in the blue shirt.
Earlier you mentioned about the movie being limited to 90 minutes, which is something I really miss from that era of movies. How do you think the movie would have fared if it was made today, where they tend to be 2.5 to 3 hours long?
George's other movies, The Dawn of the Dead was 2.5 hours long.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
no, I'm not sure. I was referring to the budgetary cut. I have no notion about a time cut, so I can't answer. Somebody else may be able to. I was referring to the budgetary cut that created the tension. I don't know anything about a time limit.
I think she just means if it was made today, if they extended it out the way that they do films now, like the Avengers, like almost 3 hours long.
Right.
Do you think this would be made on that kind of scale, or would they still try to?
Well, it could have been 2 hours. I could have been doing it, but George made cuts to every scene. Every scene that had dialogue, he put little tiny cuts in there, which cut the movie back. In fact, that first scene when I was in the helicopter, we had a huge argument about being heroes and not being heroes, and he cut it. Right at the point when the character said, if you're not on board when that happens, you're likely to have a lousy afternoon. And I clicked the switch. That's where he cut the scene, but there was a whole other scene after that.
And let's remember that Pasquale Buba had a suite in the hotel. This thing was edited by hand, snipped and cut. There was no digital then. So I'm sorry if the time issue of the length can't be addressed to you, but that's all I got. I don't know if anybody has other input into the time factor of the
All
film.
I heard was that he wanted to do a bigger story, but because of budget, he
Right.
cut it.
Right.
But I never read the original.
Yeah.
I think what's kind of nice about it, though, is there's not a lot of padding. I mean, the story starts with action. It really, everything that's in it needs to be there. It doesn't really drag. And if you cut any of it out, you lose quite a bit of characterization. So I think that between the edit and George's cuts, and probably having him very involved in the editing process, he was able to say, okay, we can trim the fat here or whatever. But I think you didn't lose any integrity of the story. If you dragged it out longer, it would have been like, okay, we get it, they're still in line.
And incidentally, he still says it's his favorite part of the trilogy, so, you know, we're gonna go over that.
Well, it starts with hands,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and it ends with hands, you know, symbolically speaking,
Yeah.
so that's.
Lady with the baby.
Lady with the baby, and the Raleigh fingers mustache. Okay.
I want to disagree with Ash. I don't think anybody was a villain in the movie. I think that there is a good argument that can be made that the villain of the movie is fear and how we respond to the fear. And I don't feel like Rhodes was a villain. I feel like that was just a man caught up in a crap situation trying to figure out how to keep people alive.
I love you.
No, George's social commentary on the military versus science, and he made a lot of those statements within the movie that were quite profound. I have to give it to him. It's very special.
Oh, I mean, look what's happening. You got, you're in Texas. Wasn't it 4 months ago that the Ebola guy got here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, then it was 3 days ago, the CDC sent live anthrax through the mail. So, hey guys, we're teetering on the void.
I think that's one thing Romero obviously is known for, but it's also just sort of been his trademark since the beginning. It's just that he never really makes a solid judgment on any character in any of his films. He keeps them, you know that guy. You know a Rose. Everybody knows a Rose. Everybody knows a McDermott. Everybody knows a John. Everybody copes with a situation like that in a different way.
But why isn't everybody at our table? I'm sorry, that was just a commercial.
Joe's lonely over there. You should go see him.
I'm never lonely.
Was there any, back to the special effects part, was there any instances where you were working with Tom, where he, on the fly, came up with a new method for, you know, working with all these special effects that y'all had?
I don't think so. I think it was pretty well planned about what he wanted to do and sculpted. It was executed brilliantly. Is there anything off the cuff or extemporaneous? I don't think so.
I remember Greg Nicotero and Tom Sweeney working on the hand, the crawling hand, but whether they were inventing it as they went, I wasn't sure. But they were looking at it as if, oh, that'll work.
Yeah, the storyboard usually, starts with that.
I know when Lori does the surgery on Miguel's arm, the original gag didn't work, and Savini had to go back and remake the arm out of wax to make it work. I don't know if that was off the cuff or if it was just the effect didn't work, but that might have been something he invented on the fly.
And I'm not sure if the machete worked too. I think they had to do a little bit of work on both. But I'll give you very quickly my death scene because it was the most complicated. A month before, I went to Savini's house because I lived in Pittsburgh, and they did a body cast. And while I'm sitting there and the cast is hardening, Tom is throwing darts. Sick fuck. I'm laying there and he's like, throw a dart at Joe. He's not gonna feel it. Guys, so anyway, so they broke the cast, and then so I got on the set for my death scene. At the end, it was the last day of shooting. Everybody got it, Day of the Dead. Everybody who died got a day to die. And I walked in, and she said, it's a good day to die. And she said, don't eat or drink anything. And I'm like, why? And she said, because you're going to be laying in a hole in the ground for 5 hours. And I was like, oh, that's wonderful. And so it all seemed very well strategic, except for the fact that when they pulled the guts out of the refrigerator, they realized that the refrigerator, I have a lawsuit with OSHA. They realized that the guts had gone putrid. But I don't recall anything seeming to be impromptu or not well. Everybody hung out in the special effects place. That was the place to be. You could go back to your little corridor, you had a cot. It was nice, but everything was happening in the special, more than you want to know, or legally, I would say. So yeah, but it was all very well. In other words, it was all very well planned.
Yes, right.
Yeah, I asked this individually, but I've been really thinking about it, and it really bothersome to me that a movie such as Day of the Dead never got a recognition from any of the Academy Awards. I mean, Amadeus won Best Picture of the Year. F. Murray Abraham won Best Supporting Actor, and I believe it was Milos Forman won Best Director, when clearly this was the best film that year. And I don't see anybody showing up for an Amadeus reading in 30 years. So, honestly, and I just don't feel that movies that are so moving as this, that means so much about society, really get their due. How do you all feel about that?
Well, in the first place, this production and the publicity for the movie